This is Ask Todd on the Financial Exchange Radio Network. If you have an existing estate plan or are in the market for one, Todd Lutsky is here to answer your questions and help you plan for later life. Ask Todd is presented by Cushing Dolan, serving Massachusetts and New England for more than 35 years, helping families with estate and tax planning, Medicaid planning, and probate law. Visit CushingDolan.com. Now, here's Todd Lutsky.
As promised, we are joined now by Todd Lutsky from the law firm of Cushing Dolan. The segment, it's called Ask Todd because, well, we want you to ask Todd your questions. So we've opened up the studio phone lines here so that you can get on the horn and ask Todd whatever you want about your estate plan. Studio line here is 888-205-2263. Again, it is 888-205-2263. So get calling just to make sure that we get to your call, because I know we've had a couple instances before where, hey, if you call too late, not getting to you. So again, 888-205-2263. Mr. Lutsky, how are you?
I am great. And you?
A little depressed.
Oh, no.
I had a horse.
You did?
It's a little bit wild, and it keeps getting out of its enclosure.
Oh, yeah? Did you fix that?
It's just a bit unstable.
Of course it is.
So we're working on it. Todd, let's take a little bit of a look at irrevocable trusts. When we talk about who can be the trustee of an irrevocable trust that provides protection from nursing home costs, who can that be? Can it be the person who is the donor of the trust? Does it have to be someone else? How does it work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of people have that question. So this irrevocable trust that we're speaking about, this is a particular type. It's one designed primarily for the protection from the cost of long-term care. And Chuck, the question's important because there are many kinds. I just want people to know that there are many kinds of irrevocable trusts out there that offer different types of planning opportunities, but also offer different kinds of control aspects. So with the Medicaid trust, the donor should probably not be the trustee. Now, I've done it, and it's worked, and it still can work, but there's been enough issues that arise that I say, you know what, just let's not go down that road. So husband, wife, or spouses create a trust, and irrevocable trust. And let's say they say, well, look, I tell them you can't be the trustee. Who should be? No, usually a child. So we'll start with that. If there's not, you could have nieces and nephews. But let's say it's a child. Then you pick a child, and you don't need multiple. You could, but you don't have to. And the child is the trustee. And so right away people say, does that mean I don't have any control? Because if I'm not the trustee, then I don't have control. Well, that's not true either, because one, while you're living, you're going to find that under these trusts, the donor really does most of everything that needs to be done. But more importantly than that, we give the donor one very important power.
Oh?
The power to remove and replace the trustee anytime they want. Oh. So their trustee becomes like a figurehead, right? In other words, letting you, if you hear that and you're thinking through this, it would seem to me that the trustee is really, that the donor, the creator of the trust, the spouses, the moms and dads of the world, are really directing the trustee. Now, remember, the trustee still has to do what the trust says, but they can kind of direct the trustee as to when and how things need to be done. So I'm okay with not being the trustee because I still have control because of that one simple power.
Because you can still choose to replace them if they're not abiding by your wishes.
I kind of like that.
Folks, we're talking with Todd Lutsky from the law firm of Cushing Dolan. If you have a question for Todd about your estate plan, this segment is your chance to ask that question. So call the number 888-205-2263. That's the studio line here. Again, it is 888-205-2263. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, it's right to your questions with Todd Lutsky, 888-205-2263. Your questions when we return.
Ask Todd with Todd Lutsky, every Wednesday at 10:30, only here on the Financial Exchange Radio Network.
All right, as promised, it's time to get right to your calls with Todd Lutsky. First in the queue, we've got Ron in New Hampshire. Ron, what's your question for Todd?
Hi. Say if a Medicaid applicant gives assets away within the past 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
and now they need elder care, need to go into a facility, and are now applying for Medicaid.
Yeah.
How and there's no trust or anything.
Right.
How are they penalized?
Yeah.
I mean, do they go after the money that was gifted? I don't understand.
Yeah, it's a big problem. This is a great question for a lot of folks who are ever faced with Medicaid application. I always tell people, please don't apply for Medicaid on your own, and this is really one of the reasons you're going to run into things as you're going through the application process. And so what's happened here, what it sounds like happened here, is during life, the person who's now in the nursing home, unbeknownst to them, of course, they might have made gifts just because they feel good and they want to make gifts, and there's, feels like the right thing to do, and they don't realize that they're creating penalty periods for Medicaid eligibility. So every time you make a transfer and don't get back fair market value for what you transferred, you've created a disqualifying transfer. And that results in two things. One, a look-back period of 5 years. So it takes 5 years to cleanse that transfer, or you'll be denied Medicaid. Now, they are not going to go after the person who received the money. They are not going to go after the gift at all. They're just simply going to deny Medicaid eligibility, and you are going to need to private pay out of your own pocket somehow. So that's one issue. The other thing that it creates is a disqualifying period, which is the dollars given divide by the average cost of nursing home care in your state. Say in Massachusetts, it's somewhere around, and this is just the number they use. I think it's like 10,620 or something like that. So you divide those two out, and it gives you the number of months that you're penalized for that transfer. However, that clock, that penalty period clock, doesn't begin to run until you actually apply for Medicaid, get denied, and the reason for the denial is only because of that transfer. And then it would start. So that's never helpful. The 5-year clock tends to be more helpful. The real lesson here, folks, is that when you give away assets to an individual, like they might have done here, could you cure that problem by getting the asset back? Absolutely. So you go back to the people who got the money and say, please give it back. And then that wipes out the waiting period. And then you can do last-minute planning to get eligible for Medicaid. Again, if you're doing it alone, it might be tough. But if you have an elder law attorney working with you, they can help you with that last-minute technique to get on Medicaid. Of course, the question that's being begged here is, whenever you give assets away while you're living to family members, children, grandkids, what are the odds of them still having it? Probably none. So you're not going to be able to get it back, and that's going to be a problem unless someone else can come up with their own money to return to the individual. Whereas if we have trusts involved, the trust that we use, and you take assets and give them to those trusts, and folks, that's really what the guide is all about. It's unlocking the power of these irrevocable trusts. When you take assets and instead of giving it to children or nieces or nephews or siblings, you put it in these irrevocable trusts. That way it's still kind of yours. You can enjoy it and control it and even use it. And you create this 5-year waiting period. But if for some reason you don't make the 5-year waiting period, you'll know where the money is, and you can cure this thing and move it and get back on Medicaid if you need to. So irrevocable trusts have way more flexibility than you think, folks. And if you've ever wanted to learn how they work, this guide is for you. It's got question and answer situations, walks you through the 30 biggest questions that I've run into over my career. 866-848-5699 or legalexchangeshow.com. You can download it there. Again, 866-848-5699 or legalexchangeshow.com. And we are at the end of the month, so we're almost done with this guide.
Todd, I've got another one all lined up for you here. We've got Eric in Boston. Eric, what's your question for Todd?
Hi, Todd. Thank you. Interesting topic. So I may be mixing the different trusts up, but I read somewhere if you appoint a child as the trustee, and then you do want to reverse that and say, well, I don't like what they're doing, I don't want them as the trustee anymore, the child theoretically could turn around and say, well, the parent or I'm no longer mentally competent enough to remove them. Do I have that right, or I'm misunderstanding something?
So you are not misunderstanding it at all. In fact, I'll just stick with either way, the irrevocable trust that we're talking about, Medicaid type irrevocable trusts, or even irrevocable like gifting trusts. If it's an irrevocable gifting trust, we generally give the trustee the power to remove and replace the trustee under a revenue ruling. An old revenue ruling, 9558, says you can do it, but when you remove and replace, it has to be somebody that's not related or subordinate to you. Whereas with a Medicaid irrevocable trust, you can remove and replace because we give you the power in the trust, and you can do it and you can replace with somebody related or subordinate. So you don't have that extra layer of restriction. Now, all that being said, those powers do exist, and you're right about that. But certainly if you don't have capacity, then no, you can't exercise that power, right? But that's for anything. It's not just because it's a removal and replacement of a trustee, right? If you don't have capacity, you can't sign documents, you can't sign contracts, you can't change your trust, you can't do a new will. And yes, if you don't have capacity, you can't remove and replace a trustee. So, but that's actually important, I think, because if you lose capacity and you're a family member, you don't want someone who's lost capacity to run around and, they can be influenced too easily. They can be manipulated too easily. It's actually a good protection to have. So I hope that was helpful.
Todd, I've got one more for you here. Let's go to Dave in Sandwich. Dave, what's your question for Todd Lutsky?
Hi, Todd. My mother has a irrevocable trust. She's had her money transferred into it for about a year. She's 88. She's in great shape now. She's living in an independent retirement place, apartment. My question is, what happens if the 5 years hasn't run out and she does need nursing home care?
So you're going to have to read the document, right? And this is important for everybody who does these trusts, but you're going to have to read the document. But there might be a way to undo the trust if that happens, right? Now, you're going to have a cooperative family and whoever the trustee is or whoever the family members are. But generally in these trusts, there is a paragraph that allows the trustee to make discretionary distributions of principal to a predetermined class of people. Generally, it would say children of all generations, perhaps, or it might say to siblings or nieces and nephews, right, of your choosing. And so at that point, you would then transfer out the assets to that particular person who's listed in the class, and then that person, although has no legal obligation to do so, can then transfer the asset or gift the asset back to the individual who's now in the nursing home to cure the penalty period that was created. And then you would need to work with that elder law attorney and apply for Medicaid, and that attorney will be able to explain to you the last-minute techniques that are available for you to get eligible for Medicaid.
Mr. Lutsky, thank you so much for joining us today.
Always a pleasure.
The views expressed in this segment are solely those of Cushing and Dolan. Armstrong Advisory does not provide any legal or tax advice. Please consult with your legal or tax advisor on such matters. Cushing and Armstrong do not endorse each other and are not affiliated. This has been Ask Todd on the Financial Exchange Radio Network. Ask Todd with Todd Lutsky has been presented by Cushing and Dolan, serving Massachusetts and New England for more than 30 years, helping families with estate and tax planning, Medicaid planning, and probate law. Call 800-393-4001 or visit CushingDolan.com.